Alrighty, so over the weekend was the finale of the show Succession on HBO Max, which is now apparently just called Max. I don't know why. So they made you download a whole new app just to watch the finale, which was really exciting. Okay, so I've been a fan of the show Succession for its entire run. I enjoy it. It is a malevolent little show. And when I say malevolent, I mean every single character is a bad person on the show Succession. So for those who have not watched Succession, it's become sort of a cultural phenomenon. The basic premise is essentially King Lear. There's Logan Roy. Logan is like an 83-year-old media tycoon who's obviously supposed to be based on Rupert Murdoch. And he has 3 kids who are all battling it out to determine who is going to run the future of Waystar Royco, which is supposed to be sort of Fox Corporation. And the 3 kids are in order of age. There's a 4th kid, Connor, but he's pretty irrelevant to the plot. The 3 kids who actually matter are Kendall, who is sort of a drug-addled, messed up 45-year-old man whose sole life ambition is to become head of Waystar Royco. But as said before, he is sort of a mashup of corporate incompetence and newfangled language. So he's constantly just dumping words like synergy out into the public and pretending that it's a strategy. Roman, who is the second son, is really screwed up from the time that he's very young. He's sort of a wounded puppy for the entire show. He has some innate business talent that seems to manifest at particular times, but he's too wounded to really run the company. And Shiv, who is incredibly manipulative. She's very cold. She's very unlikable throughout the course of the show. None of the 3 are particularly likable. The only one who's sort of likable is Roman, the second kid. And then you have Tom. Tom is married to Shiv. He's sort of worked his way up in the corporation. The suggestion is that he married Shiv because he wanted to get ahead at the corporation. And so the question is, who is going to take over the ship after Logan dies? In the final season of Succession, Logan dies in episode 3, and then they're all sort of jousting to see who's going to take over the company in the middle of a bid by an outsider played by Alexander Skarsgård to take over the company in a buyout. Kendall decides that he and Roman are going to manipulate the board into rejecting the buyout, and they can be the heads of the company. And then Roman sort of falls apart, and Kendall really wants control of the company. So the final episode comes down to, will Roman and Shiv vote in favor of Kendall taking over the company, or will they scuttle it and allow the company to be taken over by the Swedish outsider who has sort of gone behind the back of Shiv? He originally had a deal with Shiv in order for her to sort of run the company on the American side. And he was going behind her back to her husband, her estranged husband, Tom, who is going to actually run it. And so the very last episode, spoiler alert, very last episode, Shiv and Roman look like they're going to give it to Kendall, and then they decide at the very last minute that they are not going to give it to Kendall, particularly Shiv. She decides that she doesn't like Kendall, and she thinks that Kendall is going to do a bad job with the company, and then he's not competent, and so she is going to instead give it over to Tom. And the reason she's going to give it over to Tom, presumably, because again, if the deal goes through, Tom ends up running the American division. He ends up the CEO in America. The reason she's going to do that is because she's pregnant, and because it turns out she actually does want to remain married to Tom. Okay, now, I will say that, I was rooting for Tom all along. The reason I was rooting for Tom all along is because secretly Tom is the only competent one of this bunch. He's competent at brown-nosing, but he also knows who actually is competent in the show Succession. So the entire premise of Succession is that incompetent people are at the top of the capitalist hierarchy in the United States. And then most of the show is about how that's not really true. You can say a lot of things about Logan Roy, but Logan is super competent. He's very, very good at his job. Alexander Skarsgård, who plays the head of Gojo, is supposed to be a very, very competent executive. And the question, Kendall is like semi-competent, but not really. Roman is kind of semi-competent, but not really. Shiv is semi-competent, but not really. There's one point where Logan meets with the 3 of them, and he says, "You're not serious people," which is particularly true. Tom is actually competent. You can tell that because as soon as Tom is actually given the leadership role, the first thing he does is he targets the other competent people at the company and decides to retain them. So there's a character who is maybe the only other competent person at the company at all, Jerry, right, who's kind of the lawyer for the company. He decides he's immediately going to retain her. He's going to dump on the side of the road a couple of the old board members who are not competent. He's going to get rid of Frank, and he is also going to get rid of Carl. And then he is going to also get rid of Hugo, who is sort of the dirt man, in favor of Carolina, who's competent. So Tom knows who's competent at the company, and he immediately fires everybody who's not, and he retains everybody who is. So the show, which is designed to be all about how capitalism is excess and evil and terrible and all of this, it turns out that it is, in the end, kind of a meritocracy. Logan is good at it. His kids are not good at it. And so the person who ends up actually exceeding is the person who is the most competent among that bunch. Tom, who actually was good at weaseling his way to the top of the pile. And also, it turns out, he says at one point, listen, Alexander Skarsgård, again, playing the Swedish mogul, is like, what are you going to do for me? He's like, I'm going to cut to the bone. I'm going to absorb the pain for you on behalf of the corporation. I'm not going to lecture the audience. I'm going to give them what they want. And this is all seen as very evil by the writers, obviously. But the reality is that that's what business is, giving the market what it would like. And people on the left pretending that's not the case is pretty absurd, obviously. So do I think that the show succeeds on its own terms? I don't think it succeeds on its own terms. I think that the idea that capitalism is inherently soulless as opposed to presumably Marxism, which is not, I don't think that's true. One of the things that's actually nice about Succession is that there are some left-wing tropes that get punctured here too. Usually it's Roman who's doing it. Usually Roman is puncturing all the left-wing tropes and basically saying you guys are a bunch of limousine liberals, which is true. But the outcome of the show, which is that the people who are the best at this end up running the company, not actually the nepotistic heirs, that's kind of a good message, sort of a capitalist meritocratic message. Now, they don't like the company. The company's bad because it's supposed to be Fox News. One of my big quibbles with the show Succession generally is that the writers clearly do not understand politics very well. The penultimate episode of the show is an election, a presidential election, in which a Trump-like character, or maybe a Tucker Carlson-like character, is supposed to become president, and Fox News, the ATN, is supposed to decide whether or not to call the election on behalf of the Republican after an election station is burned down by right-wing fanatics in Wisconsin. And they make this out as though this would actually decide the election, which, of course, it would not. So the people who are writing the show don't actually understand politics all that well. And the truth is, I'm not sure they even understand business all that well. But the dirty secret, just like every other business show or movie that Hollywood has ever made, is that the reason people watch these shows, the reason people are interested in these shows, is because business is fun and interesting. And people who are competent are fun and interesting to watch. In the same way that Oliver Stone made Wall Street in order to be some sort of referendum on the evils of Gordon Gekko, an entire generation of young men watched Wall Street and they're like, what Gordon Gekko is saying right here, this sort of Ayn Rand take, this greed is good take, kind of into it. Kendall, in the episode, the funeral episode in the final season, Logan dies and Kendall has to give a funeral oration about his father. And his father, of course, is portrayed as a racist and a bigot and a terrible person and all this. And Kendall gives a pretty spectacular speech about how you may hate my dad, but he built things. You didn't build things. He built things. Okay, that is a fair take on what capitalism is. Again, I'm not a person who believes that capitalism solves all human problems. I think it solves pretty much all economic problems, but that's not the same thing as saying it solves all human problems. But what Succession, I think what it was trying to do is be a critique of capitalism, and it didn't really succeed on those terms. What it did succeed in doing is showing, actually, that if the world of business is entirely ruthless, the people who end up losing are the incompetent. And so for that reason, I really enjoyed Succession. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.